Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, and welcome to the American Family Insurance DreamBank, where we believe in the transformative power of dreams. My name is Andy Frisky. I am a dream curator and your host today. And on behalf of our team, we're so excited to have you all with us here today. Before we go ahead and kick it over to our featured presenter, though, I'd love to take a few moments to introduce you to DreamBank if you aren't familiar. So here at American Family Insurance, we believe that communities are stronger and the future is brighter when people are actively pursuing their dreams. And that's why DreamBank was created a little over 10 years ago. It's an inspirational community destination and digital experience that is dedicated to dreamers everywhere. Our offerings are designed to help you celebrate the dream journey, overcome obstacles, and to stay motivated. Couple housekeeping items as well. There will be some Q&A at the end. So go ahead and pop those questions into the Q&A function whenever they pop into your brain today. And I will go ahead and moderate them to Jory once his keynote is finished. But really wanted to go ahead and introduce our featured speaker today, Jory Fleming. So Jory is an author of How to Be Human, an Autistic Man's Guide to Life, and currently works at the University of South Carolina as a climate scientist and educational specialist. He's a Rhodes Scholar and Truman Scholar, holding an MPHIL in Environmental Change and Management from the University of Oxford, Worcester College, an MBA from the Quantic School of Business and Technology, and a BS in Geography and Marine Science with a minor in Geophysics from the University of South Carolina. Jory lives with several disabilities, including autism. And in his spare time, Jory is an avid bird watcher, board game enthusiast, and Scottish country dancer. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over to Jory. Jory, take it away.
Thank you so much for that warm introduction, Andy. I'm really excited to be with you all here this afternoon. I think dreams are a valuable part of us. There are things we can nurture and create inside of us, expressions of our passion and purpose, and that can help us pursue our goals and the goals of those around us. And I look forward to talking with you this afternoon about dreaming together with autism. And I want to do so in the context of images and stories. Because up in my own brain, there aren't any words at all. But there are plenty of other things, images, sounds, and things like that I hope to share with you. In fact, on this slide is an image that I generated recently in a conversation that I had with an artificial intelligence to try to provide an image of my brain and how I see it. It rises amidst papers and has corals, trees, and interesting objects floating all around it. I enjoy sharing about how my brain might be just a little bit different than many of you all listening in here today. And I hope you take away something new from my talk, and I look forward to speaking with you in the questions that will follow after as well. I want to first talk about the relationship between dreams and disability, particularly within the context of my own experiences. Now, when I think about that word dreams, I think about two related but very different meanings. The first is dreams in a literal sense, that process that happens to us sometimes at night when we fall asleep. Perhaps we go on adventures, have conversations with people real or imagined, and then we wake up, ready to start a new day. The other, more figurative sense, though, is when we talk about the future, our goals, things that we want to try to do, learn, or achieve. But when someone asks me what my dreams are, I find it very difficult to know whether they're asking me about those goals for the future or whether I was a pirate last night. And that's because I have several disabilities, including cerebral palsy, medical conditions, and I'm also autistic. And when it comes to that subtle hidden meanings that we have in language and words, that can pose a big challenge for me. And I want to share with you a couple of images to dive in and so that you can explore as well why communication might be a particular challenge from my perspective. And I want you to imagine yourself at the beach. If you're anything like me, you really love the ocean. And if you see a photograph like this, an image of a blue and inviting ocean, if you see that standing before you, you might want to dive in for a swim, just like I would. And if you dive beneath these ocean waters, you would find yourself amidst a vibrant and biodiverse kelp forest ecosystem. And as you swim from the surface down to the seafloor, you would encounter a variety of interesting and exciting creatures along the way. Perhaps you would spot a fish darting its way through the water with its fins, a huge dolphin or whale propelling itself forward with its powerful tail, and all around you would be tiny, invisible plankton, drifting in the water or moving around by using tiny appendages to bat the water this way and that. And you might find yourself drawn to one of these creatures in particular, and they all have adaptations that help them navigate and move throughout the watery environment that they call home, because the water envelops all of them. And the water too is in motion, whether that's from waves near the surface or currents down below. But when I think about what I'm drawn to in this ecosystem, it's not any of these creatures, but instead I find myself drawn to the giant kelp plant. The giant kelp stretches from near the surface down to the seafloor. And if you swim down to the base of the plant, you would find a specialized root structure called the holdfast. You can imagine something that might look like little prongs, and these will grab on to something nice and solid on the seafloor or embed itself into the seafloor. And this provides the kelp plant the stability that it needs, because the kelp seeks to grow upwards towards the light and nutrients that it needs to survive. But the kelp plant, though, has a different relationship to the water than the other creatures I mentioned before. And that's because the water presents some sort of danger to the kelp plant and a risk of toppling over. And that's why the holdfast is so important, to give the plant the stability that it needs. And likewise, when I think about the sea of words that surrounds me every day, I'm not thinking about being able to move freely in that environment or to ignore that water, but instead seeking to provide my brain the stability that it needs to navigate and thrive as well. And that's because, if you recall earlier, I mentioned there aren't any words up in my head. And so, in some respects, communication using language feels somewhat like a dream, where I have to leave the reality that exists in my own mind to engage in a shared dream that others seem to be participating and moving about in freely. And this can feel a little bit disorienting and consuming a lot of my energy at any given time. It might, in fact, appear a little bit like this image here. Now, this photograph was taken near Halloween, which explains why I'm a penguin. But you might also notice that I am wearing a blindfold and holding on to a rope. And that's because this photograph is of me in a team building exercise. And not shown here is a partner of mine off screen, who's giving me directions using language to help me navigate out of the rope obstacle course. And needless to say, I was not particularly good at this activity, but I don't think that has much to say about my leadership or team building skills, but rather that this particular exercise wasn't well suited to my unique strengths and unique weaknesses. But when it comes to communication, though, while it remains a huge challenge for me in many different situations, both small and large, I often remember that communication is a two-way street, on the other end of which is another individual or a group of individuals. And at their best, the people on the other end of that street can reach across and turn that into a bridge so that instead we emerge on a shared journey towards whatever our common goal may be. And there are many communities in my life that have helped me to realize this. And I want to share the story of one that's particularly important to me. But before I do, you need to know what a kaki is. And a cocky, which you can see beside me in this photograph, is much more than just a giant red bird, because cocky is the mascot of the University of South Carolina. And if you happen to know any South Carolinians, I bet they know cocky. And in fact, might even love cocky, even if they're not fans of USC. Whether it's interesting beak flaps, funky dance moves, or other activities, cocky strives to bring joy to everyone around them, and I think that really carries through. Now, this photograph was actually the very first photo that I took during my time at USC. And that moment marked a major transition in my life, where I was being asked from then on to communicate at a greater volume and level of complexity than I'd had to before. And this drained a lot of my energy. And I think as a result of that, I maybe didn't participate in as many communities as one might expect a first-year college student to do. But there was one community that I did find myself a part of, and that was the Cocky's Reading Express. Now, the Cocky's Reading Express is a volunteer program organized out of the University Children's Library, where students and Cocky travel across the state promoting the love of reading and literacy. Student volunteers will read out books that Cocky acts out, and each child promises Cocky that they will read each and every day. And importantly, we'll go home with a book to increase access to books in the home. These photographs show me and my recently retired service dog Daisy as several of these trips. And what I grew to love about them is that there were many different ways for me to plug in and feel part of this shared journey. Perhaps that was passing out stickers or books, visiting classrooms, or shepherding children this way and that. But the one role that I never raised my hand for was that of the student volunteer reader. Until one day, we're on the bus heading out to a school when Christine, the program manager at the time, who you can see behind me in the image on the left, spots me with one of the picture books to be read that day. And she says, "Jory, how wonderful that you're going to be reading with us for the very first time." And there's me, a little bit of language delay from autism, when all of a sudden it hits me. What did she say? But by then, it was too late because Cocky themselves, in human form, had started sharing with me how wonderful this picture book was and how many fun acting opportunities it presented to them. So I was trapped. We get to the school, I get up on stage, and before me is a sea of tiny faces of judgment. And that is when the memory of my very first reading at the Cocky's Reading Express completely vanishes. I don't know if I read this book, if I made any mistakes, but I do remember many of my other readings at the Cocky's Reading Express. Now, in many ways, in addition to the communication itself, reading at these trips was a particular challenge because it was different than the way that I read when I'm by myself. When I'm alone, curled up with a nice book in the evening, I will see and scan words from across a page and bring them all in simultaneously to generate an image in my own mind. And this works really, really pretty good. But at these Cocky's Reading Express trips, I was asked to read in a linear way, where letters come together to form a particular word, and that word has a right order, with other words around it to make a sentence. And you can imagine how, if you're learning to read for the very first time in that linear fashion, how someone doing that process correctly might be a benefit to you. But while reading on these trips was a big challenge for me, I reflect back on how supportive Cocky, Christine, and all the others were, because we were all on a shared journey. And despite any particular challenges I was facing, they invited me into these readings. And the support that they provided extended even beyond these trips we had together. This photograph shows notes and picture books that Kaki, Christine, and the others sent for me to read the night before the interview where I was selected as a Rhodes Scholar to study in Oxford, England. These books about finding courage and pursuing your dreams helped me to prepare for a big interview. And in fact, I highly recommend this method if you have a particularly scary conversation coming up on your end. And whether it's Kaki, who you can see next to me, or my mom, who you can see next to me on this other side, I reflect back on how many people have helped me achieve my dreams in spite of any particular challenges I may be facing in those environments. And I think each of you listening in can be a Kaki for someone else in your own life. When I think about Kaki, I'm amazed by how supportive they can be without using any words at all. And perhaps by adopting just a little bit of the Kaki spirit, you too can open a dream into one that becomes a shared dream by creating a door just wide enough to allow all to enter, regardless of any particular challenges. So I hope each of you become just a little bit like Kaki after hearing the story. When I think about dreams in the figurative sense, I often think about things that I would like to learn or do in the future. But I believe dreams can be broader than this. They can help us challenge assumptions and celebrate complexity that exists all around us. I started by sharing how communication is a particular challenge for me. But when I reflect on my autistic experiences, it's not only these challenges, but also the benefits that come along with my brain being just a bit different. Some of these benefits include my memory, which, while a little bit strange and selective at times, is nonetheless able to reach really far back to bring about some piece of information just when I need it or when it's relevant, even if I didn't know that I had that memorized. In other cases, my love of patterns and ability to connect concepts in my mind has been helpful in a group discussion or approaching a shared problem. But before the publication of my book, I often didn't talk about autism in this complex way. And in fact, I rarely talked about it at all. When I was meeting people for the first time, it often didn't feel right to bring it up. And by the time we met again, we had often moved to topics of shared interest or group goal. And so it wasn't necessarily unusual for people that I knew, perhaps even for a little bit of time, to be unaware that I was autistic. When I did bring it up, it often was in the context of a challenge I might be facing in that moment. Perhaps someone had asked me how I was doing, and I responded with the time. Perhaps I needed help understanding a group consensus, and particularly whether any of it involved something that I needed to do. Or perhaps I was declining a friend's invitation to an environment that I knew would be too high sensory for me on that particular day, given my energy levels. But this began to change after I was selected as a Rhodes Scholar, because I was the first Rhodes Scholar at the time known to be autistic. And I was able to have conversations with the media, including the Wall Street Journal and Harry Smith at NBC News. And these conversations were detailed and wide-ranging, where I talked about not only my challenges, but also those unique benefits that I mentioned. And what surprised me is that after these conversations aired, I heard some from people that I knew and other times from people that I didn't know about how they were able to learn something new about autism or autistic people. Or even in one case, someone found out that I was autistic by seeing me talk about it on television. And around the same time, the possibility for a book began to emerge. But at first, I was fearful about this because these conversations that I was having were relatively new to me, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to have more of them. But when I reflected also, whether in my own life or in the society around me, how I had encountered negative assumptions or even fear about autism, and how I think this was not a great thing at all. And I want to say that this fear really thrives in the absence of shared understanding. And so perhaps sharing just a little bit more about my own individual story could help add just a bit of complexity that would help challenge some of these assumptions. I first met my co-author, Lyric Winnick, when she came to visit us in Oxford, England. We spent a lot of time together in gardens, such as this one here. These are the gardens of Worcester College, where I studied. And when Lyric and I began talking, I shared why I love nonfiction. And that's because it helps me learn something new, whether that's about a person, a place, an environment, or a time in history. And we talked about how stories can be powerful and help change the world around us. We spent time too in the University Botanical Gardens, and you can see here a picture where a statue of the Cheshire Cat peers out from amidst the trees. And I recall one conversation that Lyric and I in particular had that was one of those wide-ranging ones. And we were sitting on a wonderful bench in the University Botanic Gardens. And as we were discussing, I noticed a couple pass in front of us. And a little while later, the same couple passed by again. And again. And eventually, they interrupted our conversation to say, "Could we please borrow the bench?" And we said, "Yes, you may." But it was only later that Lyric and I discovered that the particular bench that we were sitting on was the one from Philip Pullman's novels, Will and Lyra's Bench. And you can imagine, if you've read those stories, why that couple might want to take a turn sitting on that bench. And the book is structured as a series of conversations between Lyric and I, just like the one we had that day. And I imagine a reader joining us in our conversations, and how that might be particularly important if they haven't had the chance to do those yet in their own life. My dream for the book is that perhaps that shared dialogue can be a mechanism to increase understanding, which can lead to that complexity that I mentioned, to help challenge assumptions or help someone relate better to the people in their own communities that might be just a little bit different. And while that's my dream for the book, I want to share with you two dreams that I have recently, right now, that also I think speak to the ways we can challenge assumptions and celebrate the differences that lie around us. The first is that I hope to one day speak and read in Japanese. Now, a while back, I received some exciting news from my agent that a Japanese publisher was interested in translating my book. And over the course of the past couple of years, I've had the opportunity to work alongside and virtually meet my Japanese translator. Now, translation is a really interesting process, and many things were changed for the Japanese book, including the title, which translates to "I wonder what normal is." And the book just came out in Japanese this past January. This photograph shows a friend of my translator, Yuta-kun, who seems to be very excited to be holding my book and about reading in general, which is wonderful. But along this journey, something I realized one day, and that grew to fascinate me, was that I could no longer read my own book. And this really captured my interest and led to my beginning to try to learn Japanese, and kicked off the language learning journey that I'm still on today. In many ways, this new communication challenge is just as difficult as the one I started my talk with you this afternoon about. Japanese is still a linear language, and learning a new set of grammar has been very tough. But along my journey, I encountered an unexpected source of strength that came in the way that the Japanese alphabet differs from English. And that is in the visual symbols called kanji. You can see the symbol for dream here, and these symbols represent ideas, concepts, or objects, and they can be used to create words or combine with other kanji to represent larger words or phrases. And when I think about this kanji character for dream, it's very different from those English letters beneath it. If I think about the letter D, the vowel A, these are tremendously confusing to me, in part because they don't mean anything, and also because they appear again and again, but in different orders, in different words, and it's always hard for me to spot which is which. But when it comes to that visual symbol, it always refers to dreams, whether that's the word dream, or you can see down below how that same symbol can be combined with others to make different words or phrases, but each of which carry the meaning of dream somewhere inside it. And my strength came from the fact that these visual symbols were far easier for me to understand than those letters which make words. And in fact, I could memorize that symbol because when it appears, I always know that either it's the word dream or dreams have something to do with what's going on. And I mentioned that my memory is particularly good. And so along my journey, I found this unexpected source of strength. I've also been able to encounter new ideas, which is something that I love. I recently took a Japanese literature class, and while most of the works we read were in translation, I hope to one day encounter many of these ideas again in Japanese. And I'd like to share with you one quote that I liked recently from a book called How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino. If it means anything at all to live in this world, it's that you must live your life like a true human being and feel just what you feel. This is not something that anyone can teach from the sidelines, no matter how great a person they may be. Now, first, it felt really odd to me to have this new dream of trying to learn a new language. And that is because I often feel like my own relationship to English is pretty complex too. Sometimes I don't really understand the meaning of words or the conversations around me. And I thought it was quite unusual for me, reflecting on my own dreams, my many different hobbies, that I would try to pick up this new one despite that. But what I think is important is that assumptions not only come from the people around us, things that become imposed on us, but sometimes we too carry assumptions within ourselves. And encountering the kanji helped me realize that I was reevaluating my own vulnerability and weaknesses when it came to language. And that all came about as a result of me bringing up and starting on this new dream of mine. The second dream that I want to share with you is that I hope to continue Scottish country dancing as long as I'm able. Now, this photograph shows me doing some Scottish country dancing along with members of the Student Society in Oxford, England. The photograph shows me on the left in a kilt and all of us dancing together. Now, Scottish dancing, if you don't know, is a highly social form of folk dancing done with a group of dancers called a set. And this shows a set of us dancing together during the May Day celebrations in Oxford to welcome in the summer. And I hope if you're anything like me, you are also looking forward to the summer that will be coming soon. And this shows me after I had been dancing for a little while. But I want to share with you how I started dancing for the very first time. And that was when my college organized a Cadely. A Cadely is an evening that combines social merriment with dancing. And typically, evenings of social merriment are not the types of environments that I often pre-select myself into. But at the time, I was really curious to know what exactly a Cadely was, and so I decided to attend on that particular evening. And I found that I really loved the dances that we were doing. And that was because Scottish country dancing involves a lot of patterns. With your partner and with all the other dancers together, you generate patterns with movement. And these patterns can represent things like mountains, rivers, flowers. And in my own mind, I love using patterns, creating patterns, thinking with patterns. And I grew fascinated by the fact that this new form of dance was expressing with my feet something that was up inside my own head. And so after the evening ended, I took a flyer for the group's upcoming beginners class. And as I was thinking about attending this class for the very first time, I was thinking about two different things. The first is that I have muscle weakness and sometimes find it difficult to maneuver my body or have the right spatial awareness. Sometimes I say that one of my greatest enemies is a pickle jar, something that many that are close to me can attest to. And I was also thinking about my hands. And you might not be able to see particularly well from the webcam, but my hands are incredibly calloused. And that's because several of the stimming behaviors that I do make use of my hands in different ways, whether that's messing with my fingers or sucking on them. And stimming behaviors, if you don't know, are behaviors that autistic people can do, sometimes subconsciously, to be calming or to help adapt to new environments. But I was thinking about my hands and their interesting calluses, that texture that results from that, because Scottish country dancing involves a lot of hand touching, whether that's turning your partner or the other dancers around. And I was nervous about what people might think about encountering these hands for the first time. But I ended up attending on that day, and I'm very glad that I did. No one there mentioned my hands, and in fact, I found a tremendously supportive community while I was there, one that was willing to look past any assumptions that they may have had in order to welcome someone with some very interesting hands to their dancing group. When I returned to South Carolina, I welcoming community here. Scottish country dancing exists right in my hometown in South Carolina. It's a surprisingly international hobby. And this photograph shows dancers from across North and South Carolina at a recent dance this past summer. And the reason why I share this story with you is that each of you all are going to find yourself in different communities, whether that's for work, volunteering, your own hobbies, perhaps even Scottish country dancing, if you'd like to try it. But regardless of which activity your community is doing, there will be some variation of calloused hands that's relevant for that shared space. And the more that you can do to overlook any assumptions that you may have and to welcome complexity, that can make all the difference. When I think about why this was important for me, the reactions that I encountered from the people in these communities helped turn what was at first an interest into what is now a dream and a hobby. I'm now teaching my local class here in South Carolina alongside Colleen, who's pictured behind Daisy in this photograph. And I hope to be able to offer a class at USC this fall. But without the support and welcoming community that I found in the Scottish country dancing community, this may not have happened and led me to where I am today on this dream. Finally, I want to talk about how our dreams can be catalysts for change in the world around us. I think ultimately, what's important about dreams are that we can share them with one another. Dreams and stories are both powerful and empowering to other people. Each of us, regardless of where we are listening in today, are going to encounter unique expressions of our shared humanity, people that are different from us in ways visible or invisible, large and small. And all of us have some kind of dream or other that we're thinking about or hoping for. But I think that together we can create a dreamscape whereby a diversity of dreams can thrive and become more beautiful than any individual dream could hope to be. And I think the way that we do this is by bringing our dreams from something that exists in the future into our present. And I'd like to share with you a quote from my book where Lyric and I are talking about my own dreams for the future. There are trees in Oxford that have been here for longer than the US has existed. But you also have all the flowers which are here one day and gone the next. It's a sense of beauty, which is kind of like an individual person. Because people are also here one day and gone the next. People always think they're going to live longer than they do, but that's no guarantee for anybody in particular. Nature is a good example of thinking about that in a positive context. I'm not going to be the stately tree that's going to be around forever, but maybe some of the ideas and things I can do for the world could have a lasting impact that goes beyond my lifetime. But even if I don't achieve the legacy of a tree, I can absolutely achieve the memorable joy of a flower, where I can try my best to have positive interactions with people and help people when they are sad or dealing with those pesky emotion things. They are things that will be forgotten, but still mean something. We shouldn't ignore the wonders of the flower or the stately tree. We should focus on both. I think that our actions can build towards an inclusive future because each of us affect the people and the places that surround us, just like flowers do. These are two photographs of one of my favorite flowers, the snowdrop. Now, snowdrops are a very interesting flower. They only have two colors, white and green. But the way that these colors can be combined amidst the different patterns of the petals create a tremendous diversity in the variety of snowdrop flowers. The photograph on the right is snowdrops in the Worcester College garden, and on the left is some snowdrops growing in my very own backyard here in South Carolina, which explains the palm tree and the little bit of an increase in sunlight that you might spot. But when I think about the diversity of the snowdrop flowers and how much beauty they can provide to the places around them, I recall a conversation that I had with one of the gardeners at Worcester College. And we were talking about the importance of the flower beds and of the different patterns on the grassy lawns. And they shared how they imagine a student coming down from the library after a long night of studying, perhaps anxious about an upcoming exam. And the first thing they see after descending the library staircase are the patterns in the grass or the beauty of the flowers, and how this might provide a spark of joy and inspiration and energy that they need to tackle that day and any challenges that may come along with it. And I think, just like a snowdrop, it's easy to miss, but if we're intentional about creating those sparks wherever we may be, we can create spaces that are inclusive and full of beauty and joy. Likewise, we're going to be surrounded by different people. And while it's wonderful to pursue our own dreams, I'd like to suggest that it can be truly joyful to help others experience their dreams and pursue their dreams as well. One dream that I had recently was to see cherry blossoms. And my friends helped me pursue this dream when I visited them recently in Washington, D.C. over the National Cherry Blossom Festival. Now, my friends were very patient with me in helping me pursue this dream. In fact, I was so interested and engaged by these flowers that every single day that I was there, my friends diligently went with me to see the same trees in the same order, in the same way. And they were very patient, and I think we had a wonderful time together. And there's a special joy that I think that comes about sharing dreams with friends, with family, or with our communities. And cherry blossoms are really a special flower because they're so impermanent. They're here one day and gone the next. All of you listening will have unique dreams, unique visions, and the people that are around you too will have their own unique goals, unique ideas, unique hopes. They're all tremendously valuable. And I think by sharing them with one another, we can bind ourselves together in a common web. So I hope all of you listening today can be like flowers to other people as you affect the people and places around you, bringing joy and beauty wherever you go, that together we can chase our dreams and dream of a future filled with even more flowers. I'm really excited to speak with you all for some questions this afternoon, and I'll pass it back to Andy to kick us off. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jory. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yes, if you haven't yet, go ahead and pop those questions into the Q&A. But I have a couple to start things off. Jory, so how can individuals and organizations promote greater understanding and acceptance of people with autism in their communities and workplaces?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. You know, one of the things that Lyric and I talked about when we wrote our book is that how sharing stories can help us to understand, even if they're not the same. So I think what's important to realize is that autism and autistic experiences are going to be different. But that's no different necessarily than the fact that you and I might differ in many other ways as well. And at first, I think that can feel maybe a little disorienting because sometimes we might be hoping for a solution or something that's sort of a one size fits all, right? But just like with clothing, these kinds of things might be hard to find. And so if you're starting on this journey of learning about autism and neurodiversity, in many ways, it's a journey that can keep going for as long as you're interested and seeking to help the people around you. But I don't think that that needs to be discouraging. Instead, it can be rather enlivening. And the fact that just like you might always be learning about humanity and what makes us all human, that this is something that we can all collectively get better at over time, even if no one ever is quite perfect at the end of the day. And while that might pose like sort of a mix of challenges, I think it also provides some important opportunities if you're thinking about the workplace. I've had many different experiences in workplaces, and I can tell you that people that are intentional about making a space more inclusive, even if they don't always get it right, that is tremendously important. I haven't always felt comfortable to disclose or share about my disabilities or accessibility needs. And I think if you're willing to take that first step, even a small step can really make a difference if you keep going along that shared journey.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for that. Another question. So for I guess what advice do you have for what's to someone who happens to have autism who is struggling to find their place in the world or pursue their dreams, whether personal or professional?
I often think about my dreams, what they are. Something that's in an interesting kind of mix with that is that I don't like a lot of change. And in many respects, so our dreams can sometimes involve changes. And so thinking back to my own experiences, there's a little bit of a conundrum there, because if I achieve some of the dreams that I have, then that might involve changes. I think back, for example, to when I traveled to England to study in graduate school, and I had never been abroad at that point. And when I went, it was a big adjustment. I thought that, by that point, as having been successful in my first educational journey that was outside of my homeschooling journey at USC, that this wouldn't be too different. But I was quite wrong about that. There are many things about the UK that are different from America, and I experienced quite a bit of, I guess, what you would term culture shock. But I think my love of routines and my dislike of change maybe amplified that. And it took me a solid 4 months, I think, before I could really begin to feel comfortable in my new environment and my new routines. And while that was tremendously difficult, my journey had me encounter new people, new ideas, and these were tremendously valuable to me. And so it's a mixed bag, but I often still try to pursue my dreams, even if I know that they're going to come with changes that I find uncomfortable. But I also balance where I am. Some days I pursue my dreams less than others if I have less energy to do so. And I think that doing what's right for you, even if it's hard to explain to someone else, will always help you in the long run to dream and to pursue your dreams in the way that you would see fit.
I like that. So just getting really clear, it sounds like, just on personal values, it sounds like. Next question comes from an attendee. So this person states, my daughter, who is on the spectrum, took a gap year. I think she's feeling bored now and stuck with how to move on in her life. I think you've given me a new talking point for her regarding her dreams for the future. So thank you for that. Any advice on college search, and what, if any advice in the college search process, and what, if anything, just this is worded just ever so oddly. So what if anything bring up to the college, any advice on college search and what to bring up to the college about possible needs to be a success? So I think the question is regarding anything, IEP needs. So are there any needs to bring up to the college in particular, a possible to help with the success of the student? I'm sorry, that was a little cluttered. Does that make sense?
I think it does.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the reasons that I attended USC was that whether it's autism or some of my other medical conditions, I had a variety of accessibility needs. And some of those were supported by family and friends, and others were supported by the university. And universities can differ in their approach to accessibility, how it works on campus. And, if someone prefers one over the other, that can be an important attribute of learning about colleges and how they might seek to serve accessibility needs in the first place. USC and Oxford were both very different, for example, in terms of whether it was sort of one centralized office that did that or multiple. So there can be sort of logistical type questions, and having family and friends support was helpful for me, at least. I can often find that those sort of executive functioning tasks really challenging. And so I think it'd be perfectly good to sort of think about asking these questions beforehand, thinking about what you might like to see, and asking whatever questions you want to ask while you're there, if you're visiting or virtually visiting. But I think, college in general was a big shift for me. And it was challenging both times that I did it. And I think that's going to be a part of being different to some respect, right? But I also mentioned in my talk both challenges and benefits. So I also found that in addition to, having to communicate a lot more in college spaces, which was a real challenge and real drain on my energy. I also found other things that were helpful in the fact that my brain is different, though. My approach to learning, I'm always learning about new things. I love doing so. I really think that has a lot to do with autism. And when it came to things like my memory and things like that, that was quite an aid on various types of tests or other things that also come with college, right? So while it can be hard to predict, and it can be hard to adapt, I mentioned that it took me 4 months before I really adapted to England. And that, of course, impacted my university work while I was there. And it was due to the support that I received, both formally and informally, that helped with that. And so I think that it's, in many ways, an exciting journey if you're wanting to go on it. But definitely think that seeing what types of support might be available and compare that to what you think you might need is perhaps a different part of a visit process from a student who doesn't have a disability, but I think can be really important and valuable.
Thanks for that reply, Jory, and hopefully that helps the anonymous user with the question they had asked. Another anonymous question. Thank you so much for this talk, Jory. I am married to someone whose ways of communicating and learning are very similar to what you described. He does not identify as autistic, and he is 70 years old. Is there any point in talking with him about autism, or do you think I can just apply what I'm learning in the way that I communicate with him?
It could be, it could be both. I guess it would be up to you whether you decide to mention it. I often think back when I was selected as a Rhodes Scholar, I often think back to how I was mentioned as the first Rhodes Scholar that was known to be autistic. And I think that's important because, of course, that particular program, that scholarship, has existed for longer than diagnoses for autism have been part of our cultural and societal discourse, right? I think that's also what's interesting about neurodiversity as well, and how more people are talking about autism and perhaps being able to challenge some of those assumptions that they may have had about autistic people. And so whether it's bringing it up directly or indirectly by talking about, the differences that exist in society around us, however you decide to approach that conversation, could be an either or, it could be a both and. But I think that, like I was mentioning, the more we communicate about these things, I think the more we do add positivity and lead a more complex discussion. And I think that starts with being able to have these conversations with people that we know and love.
Thanks for that, Jory. Next one. So I'm a mom to a 4-year-old who was recently diagnosed with autism. I'm curious, what are some things your mom or both your parents did to help support you growing up or as an adult? You are so successful and such an inspiration. Thank you for sharing your story with us.
Thank you. I appreciate that question. I know that my needs have changed over time as I've grown. Now that I'm an adult, my needs are not the same as when I was younger. And in many ways, my childhood memories are a little lacking. It's something that I explain in the book, but my memories don't really become more crystallized and clear until sort of my mid-teenage years or so. But I know from sort of family knowledge that many different things happened, basically. There were different types of therapies, for example, that I tried, some that I didn't, some that I didn't enjoy or respond to well, others that I did do for some time. But I know that sometimes my ability to communicate was a part of that too. I remember very little about horseback riding therapy. I do remember, though, that I didn't like riding the horses, which perhaps is the main function, but I did really enjoy the particular brush that they used and really like to stand there and just brush the horse. And that's actually my only memory of that therapy was brushing the horse and how that was so relaxing to me. So I know that my mom tried many things and was willing to adapt. And I think that that may or may not be helpful, just to know that there was a lot that happened. But I think that in many ways, we're all complex people. We all have unique needs, unique likes and dislikes, and that can really kind of make a family, I guess, what you might do may be very complicated. But also I think there can be a lot of joy there as well. So if that's helpful. Another thing I'll mention too is that not only due to autism, but also because I was often very ill and had a weak immune system from medical conditions, I was homeschooled. But I think that after having experienced different educational environments and met different autistic people, there's many different pathways through life, if that makes sense. And so that's just as I was mentioning in the workplace, there might not be like a one-size-fits-all t-shirt that exactly fits everyone. It might be the same for pathways through life. That quote that I shared from How Do You Live is actually a book about sort of growing up. And there's a lot of complicated ideas, really complex emotions, and the interactions between family members in that story are really fascinating, and how not everyone, just like real life, it's very complicated. There's some successes, there's some failures, but it's a beautiful book. It was recently translated to English, and you might enjoy reading it as well.
Jory, as we wrap up here, we have time for one more question. Here at the American Family Insurance Dream Bank, we are a community that is built of fellow fearless dreamers, and we always like to ask the people who present, what is one piece of advice that you have for someone who is actively pursuing a dream?
I think my main point of advice would be to sleep. I am a teacher as well, and that's something that I always remind my students, is that actually one of the best exam preparation methods is sleep. And I think that while it's beautiful to think about the future, things that we want to try to do, it's also important to be mindful of our own minds and bodies. And you may actually dream in the literal sense and encounter new ideas without having to do any work at all. If you remember your dream when you wake up anyway. Sometimes I don't always remember my dreams very well when I wake up. But I think thinking about our dreams not only is figurative, but also very literal. And one of those can only happen if we get some proper rest.
I love it, Jory. I love it. As I have a 2.5-year-old son, so the sleep portion was a little bit harder on the front end. It's starting to get a lot more easier, and boy, am I reaping the benefits now. So I wholeheartedly agree with that insight. Jory, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us here, for sharing your story, for offering those wonderful insights. I want to thank everyone who took time out of their day to tune into this presentation. If you missed some of it, or maybe wanted to go back and watch the recording, it will be premiered on our YouTube page, which I will go ahead and share that in the chat section as well. And that is just going to be youtube.com/ at DreamBank. There is the link as well. Expect that up in roughly about a week or so. But again, thank you so much, Jory, for this. Thank you, everyone. With that being said, we will go ahead and cap it there, and we will see you all next time. Take care.
Thank you so much.